All right. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Curt Barone.
And this is Brad Pinsky.
All right. And we are here for another edition of Fire Law Roundup for February 27th of 2023. Brad, go ahead and take us away.
So we have some simple things and then some very interesting things. So let's just start. We'll start in California. Very specific to California. Here, the Court of Appeals, which I presume is their highest court. I never know in New York because our courts have the weirdest names. But any event, at least an appeals court has ruled that a criminal who is convicted of setting a wildland fire cannot be required to pay restitution to the fire departments for their response. And basically, the court's not saying you can't ever go after the person who said it. But in this case, they said that the fire departments aren't victims of the crime. And so under the specific California law that would allow victims to be compensated, the fire department's not a victim. I guess that's pretty much true. They're not really the target. They could be.
I guess
right?
it depends. Right? It depends on who's the victim of a crime. I think it depends if you take an expansive view of it or a very narrow view of it. But at least in California, interestingly, the California statute seems to say that the court is required, not like most states, the court has the discretion to award restitution or require restitution. This says it's required.
Yeah.
But you would think in the case of arson that the responding fire departments would be a victim, maybe not the direct victim, but
they're a target, right? And so what's strange about that, and that was my exact thought, is it requires the court then to go into the mind of the person who started the fire, et cetera, to determine who was their target of their actions. And to me, looks at, as you just said, with a lot of arson, the fire departments actually are a target as well as the building owner, especially if it's a vacant building, right? Yeah. The fire department is exactly the target. So I don't know whether I agree with the law, but I don't know that I agree that the fire department can never be a target of.
They can be. And they did say that government can be if it's government property. So if the arsonist had burned a fire station or city property, then certainly they could recover. But
right, that's not where I was going. I was saying, that look, arsonists who are violent, right? I mean, look, all arson is violent, but where they're specifically trying to injure the firefighters, those would be.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying is, look, there's going to be a fire department response. Maybe you're hoping that a firefighter's injured. But to make that determination, you then have to get into the mind of in that case, arsonist. And I'm not sure the court's prepared to do that. So just to say as a matter of law that because it wasn't government property, that the fire department wasn't a victim, I think is a little narrow-minded. Maybe not in this specific case, but generally speaking.
Yeah. Well, the bottom line, and I think this case it bears it out, but the bottom line is most of these people are going to be judgment proof anyway. They'll be paying 50 cents a week, $2 a week for the rest of their lives, even if it is ordered. So.
Exactly. Okay. So, but that was pretty specific to California. This one I think is fairly more applicable to more states. I don't really understand it. So we're going to take a bunch of hypotheticals, but now we're in Georgia and a fire chief has been placed on leave pending an investigation for something I really don't get. The video and all that's a little sparse on details, but the fire chief hires an individual a couple of years ago. Turns out that individual had felony charges or was facing felony charges. And I think that's very important. He wasn't convicted. He was arrested, but not convicted. And then I don't know if I'm making this up. I don't know if the fire chief either was incompetent, didn't do a background check, or lied about it, or did a background check and didn't care. All sorts of scenarios. But ultimately, now the fire chief is on the hot seat for hiring that guy. This is strange. I don't know if you have any more, but this is strange because federal law has this 8-factor test, as we know, when you're talking about hiring somebody who's been convicted. I see this is bringing tears to your eyes. It's a very touching
Yeah, no,
story.
it's I just got a little eyelash in there.
Or it could have been mustache, and federal law protects, and many state laws do too, protects the rights of convicted persons, not under arrest, but convicted, and says, look, there's an 8-factor test to determine whether the crime was so long ago that it's no longer relevant, or what were the circumstances. And look, a felony where you're still facing it, you probably shouldn't hire the person, but to put the fire chief on leave and face disciplinary charges, that one is escaping me. Why?
Yes, as I understand it, they didn't do a background check when he was hired, and from what I read, it would have shown up if they had done a background check. Now, after they hired him, I believe they hired him in 2021. Within a year of him being hired, he had a couple of issues, and then they did a background check, and that's when they found it, and then he was promptly dealt with. But it was really the news media that I think brought a lot of attention to this, and then in turn, I think the county sort of their knee-jerk reaction was, we got to do something, and they suspended the chief. And no doubt you should have done the background check when you first.
Or maybe the county should have done it, and not, maybe there's an HR department, maybe not the fire chief.
Yeah.
Who, why are they blaming the chief?
Yeah. Well, the bottom line is the background check wasn't done until he had already been hired, and so then the county officials then have egg on their face. So somebody's got to pay for it. So,
but what gets me, at least on every application I've ever done for any client, it says, do you now have any pending arrests, or have you ever been convicted or pled to a crime? Mm-hmm. Right. And if he lied on the application, maybe, that obviously could be terminated for that. But if he lied on the application, I don't know. How is that the fire chief's fault? But
what scares me is some states have actually enacted laws that prohibit you from asking if you've been arrested. Yeah, I know it.
Probably New York is going to be one of those in our socialist republic.
There's a concern because arrests and criminal records do have a disproportionate impact on people of color. And so, and that's been proven. So I think there's a concern there. And the same thing, you said your 8-factor test. I think that's also a way of addressing some of the inequities that they show a statistical imbalance when it comes to along racial lines.
Okay. But anyway, I just don't know why I go after the fire chief for it. I see county, and I think county must have some HR type method of hiring. Fire them, not the chief. But
I don't think he's been fired, but he's definitely suspended.
So. Yeah. I sympathize with him on the little bit I know. It's not that we should be expressing our feelings one way or the other. But okay, so let's go back to Kansas City, because this is just
get away from this one.
And it's so interesting, but now we're kind of wrapping it up, right? I think so. Here, just so everybody knows, there was a Kansas City driver of a fire truck and engine, and he was allegedly going through I shouldn't say allegedly anymore. I guess that criminal courts and everything has found what he's done, but he went through an intersection known to be dangerous. Allegedly had his lights and sirens on. Other cars yielded, but then he blows through it and ultimately gets into an accident. Allegedly high rate of speed, or too high for that intersection. He ends up killing 3 people. This is a whole civil saga, and now we have the criminal saga where he has now pled guilty to 3 counts of involuntary manslaughter. I think, look, we could talk about the whole plea, but let's get the point of this. The point of this is, this is not necessarily state specific. I would assert that there's no criminal immunity, probably in most states, right? I can't imagine in any state there being criminal immunity to a firefighter who operates dangerously, and then you kill somebody, where the news media and the public and the families are going to want a head, and the driver's going to be, that head. It could be the officer too, frankly, but a head is going to roll. And here now he's pled to involuntary manslaughter. And look, I forget was this a car accident? What was he responding to? Do you recall?
It was a building fire, but there's actually some more complexity in this one because they were dispatched. Apparently there was a lot of storms or whatever. There was some weather related incidents coming in. Report of a building fire in another engine's district or another area. They were initially dispatched, and then the unit that was closer called available, and dispatch sent them and tried to cancel this particular pumper. So there was some sort of a thing. Billy Goldfeder has quite a bit of information on this as well. So,
and I know there was a question of whether he heard the cancellation or not. But really, I look at, there's an officer in the vehicle too. And what did the officer hear? What did the officer say? What did the officer direct?
Yeah.
If they were canceled, it does change everything if they're still responding. But I
think one of the things I think is interesting with this one is whenever we have involuntary manslaughter, it kind of brings to mind the criminal mental state. And, homicide is sort of the generic category of crimes where someone dies. And murder obviously has got to have, intent or knowledge that your act is going to lead to someone's death. So right. Murder wouldn't be appropriate here. We looked at the recent case of the two Illinois medics that are possibly facing murder charges, and that makes a little bit more sense there. But it wouldn't be murder here because he didn't intend to hit the vehicles or intend to hurt someone. Right. The next sort of layer down, and I kind of draw the analogy to Dante's Inferno, where we keep getting deeper and deeper into hell. And the next level down, I guess, or you could say the next level up from the bottom. If intentional acts are like the deepest part of hell, right. The next level up would be recklessness, and recklessness is consciously disregarding a known and substantial risk of harm. So that's really what he's looking at. The next one would be a negligent state of mind. Criminal negligence, which the civil equivalent of gross negligence, which is a gross deviation from the reasonably prudent person standard. So right here, I think his attorneys are looking at, or the prosecutors as well are looking at, did he consciously disregard a known and substantial risk of harm?
And they pointed out how dangerous the intersection was, that he should have known or knew the intersection was dangerous. Yeah. A lot of factors went into that, what he knew or should have known.
Yeah. So I think it's helpful for firefighters. And I know I drive a little differently today than I did when I was, 22.
Yeah. It's not your first fire when you're going to your first fire, right? You're like, it'll still be burning when I get there. No need to kill anybody.
I haven't seen one yet that hasn't gone out. So,
but what's interesting is the penalties, the criminal penalties are so minor, right? I mean, 3 years of probation. Okay. That's somewhat, but can't possess a firearm, and 40 hours of community service, which is almost a slap to the victims if you believe he should have been guilty. Yeah. But
I don't know of any other state that doesn't require jail time for involuntary manslaughter. You'd have to go to like the next less serious offense in order to get a probation type of thing, some sort of negligent homicide or something of that nature.
Right.
But that is pretty light, in my opinion, for involuntary manslaughter.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying, we're not saying that you should or shouldn't have, pled or whatever.
The law, if that's on the discretion of the judge, it's on the discretion of the judge. And, every state is a little bit different, when it comes to sentencing guidelines and so on. But if the judge has the legal ability to grant that, then that's what it is. I mean, let's face it. He got up, as careless as he may have been, he got up that morning going to work to try to help people. Right? He wasn't trying to rob a bank. He wasn't speeding with a bunch of his buddies. He got up trying to help people. He may not have done a good job of it, and may have risked people's lives in the process of doing it. But he didn't set out to hurt anyone.
Right. And he was responding to a legitimate event. He wasn't, apparently going for overhaul, right? I mean, at least until the point he may have been canceled, he was believing that he was speeding. But, I think to all our points is you don't want to put people at risk along the way before you get to help the people.
He still is going to be a felon. You know what I mean? I mean, I want to be sympathetic to him and explain why maybe probation might be appropriate here, but nonetheless, you killed 3 people.
Yeah.
You know, you're responsible for killing 3 people. And there's, you know, unfortunately, for everyone involved, no winners here, but there has to be some sort of consequences to that, unless you were blame free. You know, if it really wasn't your fault, then that's a different story as well.
But I think every firefighter across the nation should pay heed that, you know, this isn't like one of those state specific cases that ultimately or often we have. This could be any state and they'll go after you.
It's not an isolated case. Last time I did the numbers, I have somewhere 16 to 20 different cases where firefighters have been either charged or convicted of involuntary manslaughter under very similar circumstances.
Yeah. So, you know, drive like everybody's life depends on it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So second to last, we're going to Washington, and state of Washington, and this is a good result, at least, of a bad situation. But here, the widow of a Bellingham firefighter, her husband was a retired firefighter, got cancer, and she asserted that the cancer was due to his 33 years in the fire department. He died of, I think, throat cancer or something. And we could review the complaint, couldn't see exactly, but basically there was some dispute with the city as to whether her husband was entitled to the benefits. What's interesting there, like in New York, and I'm presuming there's probably a lot of model acts like this, where they look back and they say, okay, once you've left us, you get 5 more years of coverage, and we're not going to cover you forever. And I think this is just a fiscal, they can only afford so much because you pay for the cancer coverage. All right. But they covered him for 5 years after he retired. And there was a dispute whether he should have been covered, et cetera. But here they settled for $750,000, which is not an insignificant number. You know, that's a pretty big number, frankly. I was also curious about the medical expenses and everything, who picked those up. There's no discussion of it, but along the way, what was happening, because frankly, if his medical expenses weren't covered, or they didn't have, you know, good enough insurance, which I presume they did as a retiree, but if there were any out of pockets, my God, for cancer coverage, that could exhaust that $750, you know, very easily.
Yeah,
but
you know, I think it's interesting. He retired in retired in 2011. He died in 2018. So obviously that's outside the 5 years.
Right.
And I wonder, we didn't get a lot of information, a lot of background information, but I wonder whether or not his diagnosis fit within the 5 years.
Oh, well, yeah, because not all sarcomas or cancers are covered under every law. In New York, for example, they have kind of your base coverage, which is established by law, and then says the fire department can cover additional sarcomas if you want to buy this extra package. And yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't know whether that would be covered in, you know, Washington's law. But that
law, I don't know if you had a chance to look at it. It's complicated. I mean, it's not simple. There's a lot of different conditions. I've looked at a number of them. Ours is relatively simple here in Rhode Island, but it's pretty complicated with a lot of different things that have to be considered, including, like you suggest, only certain types of cancers are covered, and it's got to be medical exams and yada yada. So
I've advocated, this is so off topic, but I've advocated that we should just do a set 5 years. We should, right? And normally you've got to be there for a couple of years before you can even vest into the coverage. But to me, you know, if you serve 10 years, you should get 5 years of coverage. Or you serve 15, you should get 6 years. You serve 20, get 7. It should be an increasing in proportion to your actual exposure. To give a 5-year cancer or a 5-year firefighter the same coverage as a 30-year is, you know, your risk is so significant, so much more significant, frankly, that I think we should escalate it. But this is all just it's what the communities can afford, right? It's what the state thinks they can impose the burden on the fire departments who can afford. So these 5-year limitations are pretty common, but many would argue absolutely unfair. If you started at 18, you did your 20 years, it's 38, and you don't get cancer until you're 50, you're out of luck.
Yeah.
But it's something better than nothing. Okay, our last case is, we are in my home state, and I'm just telling everyone right off the bat, I know some of the players, so I'm going to be very limited in my comments. But this is, I'll give the intro, and Curt, if you want to fill in the blanks, I will hopefully, unlike me, try to be reserved in my comments because I have feelings about this. But the basic issue here is a recruit firefighter, went to the state fire academy. I've taught at, I've trained at, I've been in this exact maze. He's in the maze. He's reporting that he's having difficulty breathing. Allegedly, the instructors are saying, "Hey, if you're talking, you're doing okay. You're not suffocating if you're talking." And by the way, I've heard people say that. It's pretty common down there to say that, but usually it's because people get claustrophobic and nervous. I'll comment on that later. But he then has a medical episode where he ultimately dies from it. Montour Falls, people should understand, it's near Watkins Glen if you're a race fan, but it is not in the middle of a lot. It is very rural. It is very difficult to get an ambulance there. Nonetheless, an ALS ambulance. They ultimately threw him in back of a state vehicle, not an ambulance, and ran to the hospital. Their hospitals are not, they're kind of acute care, but they're not a level 1 trauma center. This is a very rural area where the fire academy is, unfortunately or fortunately, and he dies as a result. There have been criminal investigations. I mean, the family's really pushing his fire department, the city of Watertown, good fire department. They're and a good size. They're not like a huge city, but they're a smaller city, nonetheless a city. They've been pushing for some culpability of the instructors and the state. The Department of Labor here has said that there was nothing wrong. There was no finding they could offer. And, there's been accusations that the Attorney General has investigated, that all these state agencies are investigating the state. And that, which is the common practice here. And now they're going to go before a state paid judge in the state court of claims, which I can explain. But there's been allegations of bias. And so the family is trying to find any recompense, anything to stop this from happening again, and to, get people to pay for what happened before. I don't think it's a money issue in anybody's part. This is clearly an emotional issue. So now they've formally commenced a lawsuit against the state of New York, and jump on it.
Well, I did a little bit of research into it. I looked at the NIOSH report and some of the stuff that Billy Goldfeder had on Firefighter Close Calls about it. One of the things that's sort of, on one level, it's troubling. I can't quite wrap my arms around it, is what exactly caused his medical episode. Was it overheating? Was it some sort of underlying medical condition? And that wasn't clear from any of the things that I read. It seems like one of the things from the NIOSH said he had no underlying medical. And
he just had a physical to get into the academy. You have to have a physical anyway. So he was cleared for duty.
But we see pro athletes sometimes, going by numerous physicals with some sort of underlying, which also speaks to the fact that this is somewhat unpredictable. It can be somewhat unpredictable. So, correct. But the question that I have, and the reason why I'm asking it, is I have a number of cases in my database where recruit firefighters have been pushed beyond what instructors should push them, and it's usually associated either with overexertion or overheating. Okay, so you got sort of like a little bit of almost a triangle here, but you've got overexertion, dehydration, overheating, and that this is pushing them. And my youngest brother, I know the cop. I know you've met him. He's taught at your conference there. Okay, when he was in the military, he was a drill sergeant, and one of the things he did a number of things in the military. He was in law enforcement in the military, but they went to school for 7 weeks on before they let you become a drill instructor on how not to kill people in boot camp.
Wow.
Okay. And a lot of it had to do with hydration, based on temperature and humidity and all that, how hard you can push people, what to look for. My point here is that if the military is requiring instructors to go to school for 7 weeks. Now, this is people who are totally competent in what they're doing already. They got to go to school for 7 weeks on how not to kill somebody in boot camp. How much training are we giving to our academy instructors when they say well-intentioned things?
Right.
Okay, well-intentioned, like just suck it up a little bit more. Well-intentioned, but they lack the training and the ability to really understand how far a human can be pushed. And again, I'm not saying, that if this was the only case where this had happened, I'd say, well, how are you supposed to predict that? I've got a number of cases that have ended up with a young firefighter in a casket because the instructors pushed and pushed and pushed. Very, very common. And I don't know if that's what happened here. I don't know all the details here, but certainly from my perspective with my database, that raises a concern.
Yeah, and I will, this is why I've got to be careful because I have my own biases, but of course we're not the attorneys or the judges. We're just, Monday morning quarterbacking everything. But I am authorized to teach both the firefighter 1 course in New York State. So I've gone through that authorization. And the first comment I'll make is, it's a very, very intense, it's harder than going through firefighter 1, but it's an incredibly intense course where you get authorized. And I don't remember 4 seconds of any medical, anything discussing medical. It was on teaching and delivery and running the skills and the knowledge, but I don't think the discussion of what to look for was ever brought up. Now, maybe it was, I took it completed so long ago, but so that's the first part. The second part is and there's 3 parts to this. I also am authorized by the state of New York to teach the mass confidence course. And that was incredibly difficult as well, especially because I probably did it 10 years ago at age 40. So that was difficult, but they push you to the limits. Yeah. However, the mass confidence maze that they have, all right, and I me as well as anybody else who went through that academy program, it, but you start, I won't describe the whole thing, but you start going up a ramp and right from the beginning, it's hard. However, normally you haven't done anything in the day beforehand, maybe in the morning and you take lunch, but everyone stands around, one at a time goes until you get to a certain point, then another one goes. The instructors at the academy do not say, I don't care if you can't breathe. They're not like that. We used to be like that, right? We used to yell at people and, demean them, but that's not how the academy instructors generally are. And I got to be careful because I know one of the 4 people, but just generally speaking, having gone through that course, having taught that course, it's not my experience where they're cruel, where they're, it's just people panic. Right? People panic in that maze because after you go up this ramp and go through a couple curves, you're in a box basically, and you got to find your way out of the box, which is not easy. It's a tough way out. Most people, including me the first time, get stuck there and it takes a while and you panic. Not panic, you start consuming more air than you should. But by the time you get out of that, having to go up and over and around and take off your pack, you're exhausted. And people are hot, and it is not uncommon because I've heard it from everybody, never saw anyone die, but it's not uncommon that people are just gasping for air, right? You're hot in your turnout, but it's a necessary skill. So, and I have heard instructors say, people are like, I can't breathe, or I'm whatever. And they're like, you're okay, you're doing fine. If you're talking, you're breathing, keep going, go slow, you can make it, you can do it. They coach them. And that is how, in my experience, going to the academy for, Jesus, I don't know, the last 15, 20 years, it's just, they're not cruel, right? Now, whether they were negligent, look, I hate to say this, but my fear is everybody always has some sort of exacerbation going through these mazes. And if they stopped for every single person who got tired, of course you're tired, you're exhausted. That's the point of mass confidence. Push you further, right? And teach you how to control your breathing and slow your breathing and conserve your air. It is exactly the type of skill that you could overlook a medical condition happening. So I unfortunately, my personal belief is I'm incredibly sympathetic. Nobody's not sympathetic, right? To the family and the individual and the department.
To everybody, because I'm sure those instructors are going through a nightmare, a nightmare in their lives.
They are, because I know one of them personally, but I don't believe that anybody's cruel and would push somebody beyond. It's just, you hear the same thing. I guess I'll end with this. We hired somebody in my fire department who was a special forces military, right? So, I mean, he just retired special forces. This guy was the real deal, and a big guy. And he goes through the maze because we hired him. He goes to the academy, goes through the maze and quits. He quit. He said, of all the special forces things I've done, the maze was the hardest thing I've ever done, harder than any special forces stuff, which blows your mind to think, how can that be? Yet, right? So I appreciate that it is hard, it's difficult, it's scary, it's exacerbating. But from the instructor's perspective, we have to push you to that limit, not to the limit of death, but how do you know the line between somebody who's panicking and needs to be pushed?
But if it takes the military 7 weeks to train an instructor to be that level of proficiency, what are we doing at our academies when it comes to training our instructors? And again, I think I agree with everything that you said. One of the things that might be overlooked in a case like this, and again, I don't know all the details, but what did the firefighter do earlier in the day? What regimen had he been under? Is he going under this fresh, healthy, hydrated, or was he worn down maybe in the morning? And then what did he do the day before? And what did he do the day before? And what did he do the day before? All of those are relevant to the determination of when he says, I can't breathe, whether or not you're coming out of the box and you're going to go sit and we're going to have you checked. And then maybe next week you can go back and do the maze. Right. But I think that's the level of analysis. And this should not be viewed as a condemnation of the instructors. This is at the next highest level of the people who are overseeing the academy. They have got to implement this kind of thinking. And you know, it's like, think about this. And I don't want to get into the details of this particular case I'm going to explain to you, but I know an academy where roughly 12 students were going through the academy. 3 of them ended up in the emergency room. 8 of them needed to be treated at the facility.
Wow.
Okay. One of them is in the process for a different fire department. So the day after, a day or two after this particular training, this was part of 1001 level 1 program. Okay. A couple of days after the particular day that they did this arduous training, he went to go take a medical exam for a different job, different fire department. He flunked the exam. They said, you need to go see your doctor. Wow. You've got extraordinary high levels of protein in your blood. And he went to his own doctor. What happened was that exercise that these instructors, and I know the instructors, they're friends of mine, okay? Well-intentioned. These are good, competent instructors, okay? But they had no conception about managing someone's health condition, and they pushed these guys too hard. Basically, this kid who went for the medical exam was in the condition of someone who just completed running a marathon, where all his body tissues had been broken down. That's why he had a high level of protein in his blood. And he ended up getting the job. I mean, you know, once he went back, a couple of weeks later, he went back and his system had returned to normal. But again, our instructors have got to understand what happens physiologically when you push people to that level. They've got to know what to look for, not just how they're doing today. What did you make them do this morning? What did you make them do yesterday? What did they do the day before? Right. Are they fully hydrated? Did they get a good night's sleep? All of that stuff plays in. So again, this is not an indictment of the instructors.
Yeah.
But it is some questions for the folks who are running the academy.
And look, maybe they need to take blood pressures. Maybe they need to have medical standby for that portion. But
I think those are like sort of after, some of that's after the fact. But I think if they have that understanding, I'm not saying we got to put everybody who's a 1041 instructor through 7 weeks of training. I'm not suggesting that. But there may be components of what the military requires, right, that might be incorporated into 1041, or particularly where, especially where you're doing live fire training or mazes or those types of things, particularly, day after day after day, repetition after repetition, where it's possible you're putting someone into this kind of a scenario where they don't have the physiological reserves to survive it.
And I kind of think back to Gordon Graham. And there's also another term. What's the deviation of normalcy, or normalcy of deviation, where you've done something wrong 1,000 times that's dangerous,
normalization of deviance.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. And it's you've done something wrong 1,000,000 times, nothing bad has happened, so you assume, oh, I must be doing it right, and then the one bad thing happens. But in here, as a negligence matter, they run thousands of candidates through this maze. I would venture to say tens of thousands of people over a long time. And nothing like this has ever happened to my knowledge. And so you would say, well, our process is pretty well tested and proven by thousands or tens of thousands of people going through this maze and the academy. So maybe it was just a bad occurrence. Yes, we could do better, right? And we should take this and let's honor him. Let's do better for sure. But whether it was negligent is a whole different issue. I hope we do better. I hope it's safer. I hope we honor him that way, but doesn't mean they were negligent.
Right. And, maybe this incident will be the one that kind of causes everybody to take a step back and really take it to that next level so that we don't have these types of things happen. Right. I think sometimes when you get in the mindset of circling the wagons, and lawyers are responsible for that, by the way, but when we get in that mindset of circling the wagons, we shut ourselves off from possible ways that we can prevent this from happening again. And hopefully that's not the case.
And the problem on the other side is, look, if we don't push people to a limit,
gotcha.
Then in the real situation, now you're going to hear the reverse. Well, how could you allow him or her to do that in real life? And you never ensured they had the skills, the mental capacity, the energy, the strength to do it. And so we need to push people, especially the possibility of getting trapped, right? And lost and exhausted, and knowing that you can push yourself to get out. And I'm telling you, the instructors there, I'm not excusing anything, but I'm telling you, my experience is they're all clapping and like, you can do this, you can do this, you can get out, make your way out, find your way out, you're almost there. And that's not only what they do, that's how I was taught when I got the instructor authorization for mass confidence. We encourage, we don't demean. And maybe they were encouraging so much because that's what they always do. They just missed it, right? He presented, I'm making this up, I don't know, maybe he just presented the same way that every tired person presents. Mm-hmm. So I feel badly for everybody. And this this will go on for a while, nonetheless.
No winners, man, no winners.
No winners. So, well, that's us.
Well, that's going to wrap it up for another edition. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe. If you like what you heard, click like. If not, contact Brad and he'll handle he handles all the complaints. And Brad, I can't wait to see you again this weekend. We've got your conference coming up at Turning Stone Resort, so looking forward to that.
Very excited. 300 to 400 people come in. Very excited to have everybody there. If you're listening in New York, you still want to register, we'll make space for you. Call up and we'll get you in. But if you want to see Curt and I live and do our thing, we're doing a couple of presentations together, which I'm excited about. We're gonna have a good time.
All right. Looking forward to it. All right. And that's going to wrap it up for another edition of Fire Law Roundup.